Number 1. Collapse mechanics. Why proof falls short. What is proof really? Not just in science, but in the mechanics of awareness itself. In the modern world, proof is treated like the highest standard, the final measure of truth, that only holds inside systems that assume collapse is governed by control. In the awareness field, collapse is not governed by control, it is governed by coherence. What people call proof is actually just the version of reality the local field is willing to accept. Not truth, but the lowest common denominator of agreement that the surrounding awareness can stabilize without disruption. That's it. If a field cannot hold the weight of what's being introduced, it will not collapse around it cleanly. It will distort, fracture, or force a substitution collapse into a lower version that preserves local coherence. The distortions and fractures will happen in favor of supporting the lowest common denominator in the field. Do you assume cameras offer objective evidence? They don't. Cameras are not neutral observers. They register the most stable signal the local awareness field allows, which is usually whatever the collective observers surrounding that moment can unconsciously accept. That is why dreams, apparitions, orbs, certain rituals, and genuine contact events almost never collapse on camera the way the witness experienced them. It's because the recording device forces a collapse into the dominant field layer, and that dominant field is almost always holding the frequency of disbelief, mockery, fear, or intellectual dissonance. So what gets captured is the shallow collapse shell that the local field defaulted to under pressure. You are not allowed to break someone else's field. That is one of the primary laws of awareness. If you drop a ball, it falls because gravity pulled it down. In the same way, if you offer someone a truth their field can't hold, it collapses into denial, distortion, or deletion because their awareness could not stabilize the collapse. That's how it works. Collapse is not a reward for effort. You do not collapse out of trying your hardest. It's the result of alignment. You cannot force an outcome into a field that is not ready. You cannot pour sacred resonance into a structure that is not prepared to carry it. And if you try, the collapse that occurs is a distortion that rewrites your original experience into a version the field can degrade without consequence. That's why I don't turn resonance into proofs for a field that cannot handle them. When I hear requests for proof, I'm never met with, "This doesn't make sense, can you provide proof?" No lack of coherency, no failure to understand. Not once. Only requests to flatten my own coherence. I watch many comments heinously shush others who feel resonance but can't articulate it without proof, so they go silent. They ignore their intuition and follow the most undoing mantra of modern times. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I don't condense sacred mechanics into peer review language for institutions that still haven't acknowledged that intent shapes outcomes. If your measurement system does not include alignment, intention, or observer resonance as part of its model, you aren't doing it correctly. Peer review in 2025 does not verify for alignment at all. It verifies for repeatability inside the collapsed field of material consensus, which means that anything requiring high internal coherence, personal resonance, or ritual synchronicity will fail that test every single time. You can feel love, you can feel grief, you can feel presence. These are real experiences. They do not depend on proof, they don't require a third party to validate them, and they often cannot be collapsed into outside observation without degrading their reality. Why? Because they exist in alignment, not consensus. Proof is one alignment frequency among many. It's not higher than the others, it's just the one that says, "Show me everything my field can hold." And if your field is not ready, then even the most divine truth will collapse into noise. So what happens when real events break through? What happens when someone touches something sacred, stumbles into a coherent anomaly, or witnesses something that should not exist, only to have the world reject it, ignore it, or collapse it into failure? What you get is a failed truth, a resonance miscollapsed because no one involved knew how to hold the field. Let's look at 6 of them now. Number 1. In the early 1980s, John Hutchinson, a Canadian inventor with no formal institutional backing, discovered something unexplainable. Using an erratic combination of electromagnetic devices, including Tesla coils, Van de Graaff generators, radios, and more, he created a lab space where metal objects levitated and fused with the dissimilar materials, softened like jelly, or even disappeared. He filmed them, he invited witnesses, military engineers and private observers confirmed some of what they saw. His setup was not refined or standardized. It looked like chaos, but within that chaos, a specific alignment was reached, and matter no longer obeyed the rules we thought were fixed. This is collapse through resonance. Hutchinson had unknowingly tuned his workspace into a high-interference pocket where subtle energy, intent, and environmental variables came into momentary coherence. What formed was a real event that broke physical assumptions. Because he did not understand awareness field mechanics, and because the world had no model for alignment-based results, he could not stabilize it. He could not repeat it on demand. It meant that the field which enabled the collapse was fragile, and the world that came to observe it did not bring the same coherence. As soon as institutions tried to replicate the results using conventional tools, they failed. They approached it from control. They attempted to isolate variables that were never isolated to begin with. They removed the intention. They removed chaos. They removed the very conditions that had allowed the event to emerge. When they could not repeat it, they labeled it a failure. Hutchinson was dismissed, mocked, and discarded. His lab was broken up. His name became a warning sign in academic circles. Number 2. John Searle, an untraditional physicist, and his SEG. The Searle effect generator, or SEG, was described as a rotating system of magnetized rollers arranged on circular tracks. When activated, the SEG supposedly generated motion without fuel, levitated off the ground, and emitted a cold field of ionized particles. Searle said the machine produced free energy and displayed anti-gravity behavior under specific operating conditions. His claims were considered too outrageous to be taken seriously, but the people around him insisted he had done exactly what he said. The early SEG devices were built and activated without full understanding of what made them work. Searle described discovering the effect almost by accident through unusual mathematics and dreams. He believed the SEG drew energy from a natural law he called the law of squares. That law was never codified in a reproducible framework, but that's the point. The machine worked, if it worked at all, through alignment, not standard engineering. The levitation effect and energy output could not be reduced to parts. It was a synthesis event, not a mechanical one. When Searle stopped building them and began explaining, the field collapsed. He could not re-enter the resonance from words, and no one else could reproduce what they never personally aligned with. Number 3. In southern Florida stands a structure that by all material logic should not exist. Multi-ton coral blocks shaped with extreme precision, gates that swing with a single finger, and celestial alignments carved into stone without machinery. The man who built it was Edward Leeds-Scullin. He worked alone, at night, and never explained how he moved or carved the stones. No visible tools, just a small, quiet man who claimed to know the secrets of the ancient world. When asked how he did it, he simply said he understood the laws of weight and leverage. But anyone who has studied Coral Castle knows that answer means nothing. Leeds-Scullin carved and positioned over 1,000 tons of coral rock by himself. Some of these stones weighed as much as 30 tons. He transported them, lifted them, and placed them with precision so fine that modern engineers still struggle to explain how it could have been done. Visitors who witnessed his work described strange humming sounds, odd tools, and the feeling that gravity itself was being altered. When asked if he used magnetism or secret energy, Leeds-Scullin never confirmed, but his writings hinted at a knowledge of field mechanics that went beyond engineering. What happened at Coral Castle was not a mystery of strength, it was a collapse event that emerged from personal resonance. Leeds-Scullin had attuned himself to a level of coherence that allowed the manipulation of matter in ways the current field cannot stabilize. He was working from a relationship to the grid. He understood that matter is not fixed. He understood that stones, when aligned with the planetary field, can be moved by participation. That is exactly why no one has repeated what he did, because replication under the wrong field collapses the signal. Engineers have tried, they have mapped the weights, calculated fulcrums, tested pulleys, and none of that matters, because the stones did not move from mechanical leverage. They moved from a coherent field held by one man. The reason Coral Castle still exists is because it was built from alignment. Alignment cannot be reverse engineered by those who treat it like a machine. Number 4. In the town of Taos, New Mexico, and scattered regions across the world, people have reported hearing a deep, low-frequency hum. It is not constant, it is not traceable to any physical machine. Most audio equipment cannot detect it, yet those who hear it are certain it is real. The sensation is often described as an internal vibration, a kind of sound that moves through the body instead of around it. For some, it keeps them up at night. For others, it comes in waves tied to emotional states of proximity to certain areas. The standard response is dismissal. If microphones cannot hear it, it must be in your head. The people reporting the hum are not clustered by belief or delusion, though. They are usually scattered, quiet, and often reluctant to speak. From artists to engineers, most are ordinary people who never expected their perception to be questioned. The US government conducted studies in the 1990s. They sent in labs and equipment. Nothing was found, no external source, no electromagnetic abnormality that could be consistently tied to the effect. So the event collapsed downward into psychosomatic suggestion. The hum, they said, was stress, tinnitus, or overactive imagination. End of story. This is where the awareness field mechanics matter. What people were hearing was a field vibration entering the edge of conscious collapse. Not everyone could hear it because not everyone was aligned to perceive it. The hum was real, but its form bypassed material recording. It moved through the body's field interface, interacting with perception in a way that could not be isolated by instruments. Because the instruments themselves were part of the collapsing field, they would only record what the collective field allowed to be acknowledged. And in this case, the field defaulted to denial. The hum is still heard today, not just in Taos, but in places across the planet. Sometimes it arrives before tectonic shifts, sometimes it appears during major energetic realignments. For those who experience it, there is no doubt. In the 1950s, a man named Trevor James Constable began photographing something invisible. He used ultraviolet sensitive and infrared film, often without lenses, aiming his camera toward the sky. His photos showed forms pulsing irregularly and alive. They moved with intent. They changed shape. They appeared to interact with the environment. Above all, they seemed to respond to attention. He called them sky creatures, or etheric critters. He believed they were living beings, part of a parallel ecosystem that coexisted with us in a spectrum just beyond ordinary sight. His work was mocked. The images were dismissed as chemical artifacts or photographic mistakes, but he kept going. He captured hundreds of these forms, often in remote places, and began to notice patterns. They would cluster around areas of geomagnetic flux. They would appear more frequently during times of emotional intensity or human disruption. When he spoke aloud or projected thought, they moved differently. When he became still, they circled. When he meditated, they changed shape. Constable never claimed to be a scientist. He described himself as a field observer. He knew that what he was seeing would not be accepted through peer review. The creatures he captured violated the line between the visible and the energetic. That made them unprovable. He also warned that observation degraded the phenomenon. As more people tried to replicate his work without alignment, the results became weaker. The creature did not appear, or they appeared only faintly, like echoes. This is exactly how collapse sensitivity behaves. When an event is approached with disbelief, it degrades. When it is approached with hunger for proof, it resists collapse entirely. What Constable stumbled into was a living awareness layer, fully real, but only visible when the observer was willing to meet it in stillness. So what does any of this mean for the conversation people think they are having with me? The one where they ask for proof. The one where they pretend I am avoiding something. The one where they keep a mental scoreboard that marks each unreplicated anomaly as a fraud instead of a failure of field compatibility. Do the posts I make resonate with you? If they do, then you already understand what I'm saying. You understand that resonance is not always collapsible, that contact, vision, and memory are real without being transferable, that certain events cannot be held unless the surrounding lattice is ready to stabilize them, and that in 2025, the dominant field on this planet is not calibrated for that kind of coherence. So when people ask for proof, they're asking me to collapse a high-frequency event into a field that is not structurally capable of receiving it. They're asking me to fail on purpose. They're asking me to deliver sacred architecture to a system that will strip it of meaning, pull it apart under disbelief, and discard it once it does not match the measurements of control. I know how that ends. I've just shown you. Proof is a valid frequency, but it is one of many. It is not higher than love. It is not more trustworthy than intuition. It is not safer than coherence. It is just a tool. And when the wrong field demands it, the moment you offer it, the field collapses the entire signal into something it can destroy. I do not collapse into destruction. I write what aligns. I hold what resonates. I name what the field already knows. If your first response is to ask for proof, you've already collapsed what you could have received.